So tonight we have a presentation by Kyle. Kyle, your name, Jolliffe? I forgot to ask you how you pronounce your last name.
Jolliffe.
Jolliffe. And his presentation is on early 1900s postcards of transportation, public transportation in New York City. Kyle lives in Toronto, or in the Toronto area, and but he collects postcards from New York City, different topics of New York City. He told me that his father bought and sold postcards at one time, and I think that's what got him started collecting the New York City cards. I've seen a lot of these cards that we're going to see tonight, and they're really good. It's going to be a very good show. You're going to like it. So with that, I turn it over to Kyle.
Yeah, I'd like to have you think of the Western New York Postcard Club being on a trip to New York City. The date would be July 11th, 1909. So we'll see pictures from the city that depict the public transit network. So my talk is called Public Transit in New York City in the Golden Age of Postcards. The first picture on the left was a futuristic image of the city. It didn't quite happen that way. But the picture on the right is of the elevated railroad station at 110th Street. That was on the 9th Avenue elevated line. It was quite high up. It was the highest point in the city. This is a lovely card by Rachel Robinson Elmer. Of course, you couldn't really get that in 1909. You couldn't travel that fast to New York City, but people did know that the Wright brothers had invented the flying machine, so they certainly expected the speed of travel to increase. So perhaps not by this much, but still a great comic card. How the regular tourists saw New York was by these early buses. It's a wonderful Detroit photographic card. Our imaginary trip starts in the Madison Square Avenue. We're staying at Hotel Victoria. So we're going to walk from the hotel at 27th Street and 5th Avenue down to 23rd Street, and then over to the 23rd Street Ferry Terminal. We'll also travel up the elevated to the Broadway and Lincoln Square area. We'll travel in the subway. But for the moment, we're going to go travel to the to Hoboken, over to Hoboken via ferry. So here's the 23rd Street ferry terminal. We're going to get on the ferry. This is some of the ships in the background in the busy harbor. The majestic New York skyline behind us as we travel across the harbor to Hoboken. And here's the new Lackawanna Station on the Delaware, Lackawanna and Western Railroad, showing the ferry slips in Hoboken. So we'll enter the station and we'll go downstairs to the newly opened Hudson River tunnels. Here's the mezzanine, some well-dressed travelers waiting to board a train. And here we meet the ticket chopper at Hoboken. We'll deposit our ticket. And here's the people going into the station. We're about to get on the train. All on for New York. Train under the Hudson River. That's what somebody wrote on this postcard once. This is inside the cars, the interior. So of course it was a big job building the tunnels under the Hudson River for what is now the part of the path. It's one of quite a number of cards showing the sandhogs working behind a shield, digging the tunnels, digging the Mcadoo Tunnel. Another fine card showing the workers again in front of one of the shields at work in the airlock. And this is where the construction parties digging from the two sides met in the center of the Mcadoo Tunnel. It's quite a feat. People have been working on this project off and on for decades. And of course, these are the big bosses who always want to take credit, who always want to take all the credit when a job is done. This is one of the tunnels that somebody wrote on the back of a postcard. One of the tunnels as we fly like lightning through. And here we're arriving at the tunnel at the terminal in New York City. Exiting the terminal to Church Street and Cortlandt Street. So on one side was the Hudson Terminal buildings, and the other side was the St. Paul's Churchyard next to Broadway. And we'll board the old Barclay Street Terminal horse car to go over to Broadway. And here we are at the corner of Broadway and Barclay Street, looking north and south. Here's City Hall and Park Row in the newspaper district. One of the double-deck electric Broadway streetcars. So Broadway is always packed with streetcars. This is just looking north just before the Hotel Astor in Times Square. But the streetcars have their problems. This was a big, as we can see from this image of a major storm, after a major storm. Here's Broadway and 33rd Street as we make our way north, also known as Herald Square. Some New Yorkers are fond of the L. This is the 6th Avenue line, north from 14th Street. That's the shopping district, south of Madison Square. And there's a picture of the L before it was electrified in 1903. It's quite smelly and dirty with the steam locomotive pulling the cars. This is the S curve in the south part of Manhattan. Fatal tragedy of September 11th, 1905, when some people died. When this wreck happened. Lots of interesting views of life next to the L. This is on 8th Avenue at 116th Street North. And this is at 110th Street where the 9th Avenue L turns up 8th Avenue. We saw a card of this at the start of the presentation, the highest point of the elevator. So here's where we're going to have lunch, the Hotel Empire, Lincoln Square at Broadway and 63rd Street, very close to the subway and the elevated railroad stations. All surface cars and 5th Avenue motor buses pass the doorway. This is a picture of Lincoln Square and some early automobiles and streetcars. And this shows when the subway is being constructed about 1902 in that area at Broadway and 64th Street. And the Hotel Empire dining room where we'll have lunch. One of the new 5th Avenue buses. We'll take that back downtown. And so here we are at 5th Avenue, 42nd Street, just west of Grand Central Station. The church in the immediate background actually is Synagogue, the Temple Emmanuel Synagogue. And here's Grand Central Station where trains from the north and the east arrive. A waiting room inside that huge building. And a picture of inside the station's vast train shed. But all that is being replaced. A massive construction project that will lead to the opening of Grand Central Depot in 1913. And here's a sectional view of the new Grand Central Terminal, showing the various connections in and out of the terminal. Quite an amazing building. Also, the Pennsylvania Railroad Station will open next year, 1910, on the Hudson River of New York City, Hudson River side of New York City. And a picture of the general waiting room to be constructed inside. and a picture of the arcade in the station. Also a picture of the concourse showing the tracks. And of course, the Pennsylvania tunnels with the trains connecting to New Jersey. So the next part of our trip today is on the subway. We'll go from 42nd Street down to downtown. So these are the subway entrance and exit kiosks. Somebody said at the time, if you want to go anywhere in good season, take the subway. These just outside the Wanamaker stores. So here, the ticket chopper must be having lunch. A typical subway platform. So express trains are also a special feature of the subway. And here's a picture of the opening day of the subway in 1904. It really was a big day. A new era in the city. Of course, the subway stations can get quite hot. This is the Bleeker Street station. There's a big ceramic tile design on the wall at the left. So here's a close-up shot of that. So of course, one of the busiest parts of the entire public transit system in New York City is the Brooklyn Bridge Station in Park Row, as office workers come and go in the morning and evening rush hours. So the giant platform at the Brooklyn Bridge entrance. The evening rush at the Brooklyn Bridge. Some people walking across the Brooklyn Bridge. So on our tour, we can walk across if we'd like. Most people, though, will take the trolley or the elevated, across the bridge instead of walking. So coming back to the city from our trip across the Brooklyn Bridge, we can stop at Kalil's restaurant, have something to eat. Popular place with the luncheon crowd and the theater crowd. Here's the City Hall subway kiosk. So the City Hall subway station is one of the most beautiful in the city. Here's our last stop, the 23rd Street subway station. So now that's the end of the tour. But it does show how New York City had a really developed public transit system at the time. They strove to do their best to get people moving across the metropolis using the most advanced transportation networks possible at the time, underground and above ground, using ferry systems. So do you have any questions?
I'm always amazed at your the quality of postcards that you have been able to collect and to see all these scenes and views, and they're different than the ones that I usually see if I look at a New York City category. You've just done a great job, Kyle, of putting them together.
I thought the exact same thing. They're definitely different than the typical New York City ones that you see.
Right.
Yeah, there's some exceptional ones that I had never seen before. Recently, I watched a program done through our library, and the gentleman who was in charge talked about the different mosaics in the subway system, and they're fairly newly placed. Do you know anything about this? I know Miriam and I met the woman who was in charge of mounting these graphics all along this, central Manhattan, I think, but beautiful mosaics. Anyone information on that?
Wow.
I was saying that the new Q train has new mosaics. It's a new system, and they have some really lovely lifelike showing.
That's a tour unto itself, just looking for the mosaics across town. I think 42nd Street has a whole slew of them.
Kyle, I think that that ceiling in the City Hall is a Gustavino ceiling.
I believe that. I believe that's correct. There are tours of it occasionally, but the station has been closed since the 1940s because the platform doesn't fit well with modern trains.
You can if you stay on the train at Chambers Street, you can ride down and back, and you can see in there. It's a little dark, but you can still see the station.
Cool.
How long did it take you to put this collection together?
I started collecting about 1998 was when I started collecting. I went to a lot of shows and stuff on eBay, and so it's a combination of different themes. It's ocean liner cards. It's cards from the construction of the Hudson and Manhattan Railway. It's street scenes by the Detroit Photographic Company, also the Rotograph Company. So there were so many postcards produced of New York during the postcard craze that you really can sift through all the chaff and find some real gems and connect them together in certain ways. If you reimagine, how the people of the time lived and went about their days, that there were flows east and west, that essentially Manhattan Island ceased being an island with the bridges and the tunnels and subways and elevated railways, that vast numbers of people were able to flow in and out of the city.
You mentioned the Mcadoo Tunnel. Someone's going to have to help me with this also. I only have a piece of information that I could remember. But Mcadoo was a wealthy financier, and I believe Roosevelt's daughter married him, or vice versa. So he was part of presidential heritage. And you can find him in other postcards as well.
Would that be Theodore Roosevelt's daughter?
I think it was Theodore Roosevelt. Oh, it's not Franklin, but listen, it could have been Taft, but I think it was Roosevelt's daughter. Oh, which is Alice. I should look her up. I have my phone here. But that would be, if you're interested in that tunnel, there's a lot written about the person who financed it and who appears in those pictures. And the fact that his name lives on.
There's also a sense of excitement sometimes on the cards about the newness of it all and enjoying going through the tunnels or using the subway. And that's something quite special.
Well, I think the whole idea really of creating the cards as a collection, as a narrative is, I don't know anybody else that's quite done that. Maybe other people here do know that, but I don't. And I'm thinking, it almost sounds like it could be produced in almost a Ken Burns sort of a presentation. I mean, more broadly than just the New York City, which is wonderful and interesting in its own terms. But you say you collect ships as well. And I'm thinking of how we moved, because we think of ourselves, I do at least, of maybe currently as being somehow normal, but people couldn't even have dreamed about how we move now and what we moved for recreation, for work, and all that stuff could be interwoven using postcards to create a sense of the moment at the time, and also expanding the whole idea of how we moved. Just like a little footnote, I talked to a friend who was a granddaughter of a photographer that I've collected, George Wilkie. And he traveled in the Southwest in Texas and Oklahoma a lot. And I asked her, how did he get around? Because he's I see the dates on the cards. He's in Texas, and 2 days later, he's in Oklahoma. He's moving around a lot. And she said, oh, back in the day, there were trains connecting all these places, and you could move from place to place to place. And then when they built the highways, they tore all those trains down. The tracks tore the tracks up, and the trains couldn't move, et cetera. But I'm just spontaneously reacting to the expanded notion of what you've initiated here. I think it's really quite exciting as a possibility and a way of thinking, using the postcards to tell us how we were in a way that somebody hasn't really imagined, in my experience at least.
Yeah, there's a great video you can find on YouTube it's about a 7-minute clip of New York City about 1911, which gives a similar image of the tremendous speed at which the city traveled. The vast numbers of people on the streets, and going from Hoboken to New York City, or crossing the Brooklyn Bridge. And we from a distance, we lose a sense of that speed that existed at that time, even though it seems that the streetcars and the elevated railways were slow and cumbersome. But for the time, they were an efficient way of moving people up and down the length of Manhattan Island, and between New Jersey and Brooklyn. Really did move vast numbers of people.
And then also the ferry to Staten Island. There's a lot of early cards, especially like Hold to the Lights of the Staten Island ferry, which is really incredible.
Kyle, are those cards that you have collected, or were they hard to find, a lot of them, when you were looking for those type of cards?
It's just something that's gradual, and there are some cards in that presentation that are actually in the collection of the Hoboken Museum that I have not been able to find. Most of the other cards are in my own collection.
Yeah, because like Al said, you don't typically see, when you see cards from New York City, you don't typically see cards like that. Well,
it's a lot of dealers think New York City cards aren't worth selling, but there are real gems in there, because some of the cards, especially the Hudson and Manhattan Railway cards, they were produced, to celebrate a great engineering achievement. So they're harder to find, but they're quite wonderful. They give a sense of the labor history and a sense of a new, exciting way of traveling, and they're the building blocks of the modern New York City public transit system. The elevated railways were almost all torn down and replaced by subways or cars, but the subways and the ferries and the bridges, they're all still there. They're still functioning. So.
I got a question for David. David, you mentioned before that when the roads were built, they tore up a lot of the railroad tracks.
That's what I was told.
Was that like around the country? A lot of railroad tracks were torn up back then, or?
Well, I don't have what it was. I'm so far from authoritative that it's a joke. But on the other hand, I do, in a book on photo postcards that I think I mentioned, I've put together, I found a 1909 map of the United States, and I was astonished at how densely the country, the states, the cities, and so on were interconnected by railroad tracks. I guess I thought of, well, it wasn't exactly frontier land at that time, but maybe in some ways it was. Oklahoma was still Indian territory. But the thing that amazed me was how little I knew about how interconnected the country was and how one could move around in the United States in the earliest days of this century. And when I, in my vague imagination, thought that, you know, we were scantily connected, you know, so, but at any case, the woman that I spoke to, you know, had known her, I guess, grandfather, great grandfather. And she said, oh, he told me that he could go from town to town and travel all over the Southwest readily. Just, I mean, from little town to little town. And then, of course, I don't know the history of it, but actually you can't do that now. So at some point, those rail connections were, you know, torn up. I'm sure there's a really interesting history in that. Well, I know people have written about the takeover of the country by the oil companies and their investment in road building and so on and so forth. But I think that there are many stories to be told. And I think just to have the idea for a story, there's going to be some young historian, or maybe not so young, who's would find this so compelling.
Well, actually, the railroads were pretty ruthless, and they took over the country also.
That was the first predator.
They would get the right-of-ways from the government. That included quite a bit of land on both sides of the tracks.
Sure.
And, you know, the New York Central, which built Grand Central, was owned by the Vanderbilts, primarily in the beginning, Cornelius Vanderbilt. And he was a real cutthroat guy. And you didn't get in his way. You know, he'd eviscerate you if he could. And Union Pacific, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, Chicago Northwestern were all empires. And the one thing they all hauled, and I just read a review of this, was wheat. And we became the supplier of wheat to the world. And the part of the world we almost put out of business was Ukraine, which was a massive producer of wheat, but they couldn't compete with us. And it was the railroads that hauled it. New York City was a great exporter, where a lot of wheat left this country there.
You are bringing up, I guess I have a question for you. And that is, I never quite thought of it in these terms because I sort of vaguely know what you're talking about, of course. The railroad, they didn't use the words barons, you know, kindly to people. But at some point, would you say that it was the oil company, that somehow the oil magnates, the oil barons had a similar power to the railroads and they were able to somehow overtake them?
Later they did. They came later. And,
right. Well, somehow that happened. I thought.
You know, it's you know, they did put the railroads out of business in a way. I mean, because, you know, after World War II, the railroads were exhausted. They had worked hard to win the war. And at that point, the construction companies in the oil industry wanted to build highways. And they wanted to get people on the road. And the automobile companies wanted to build cars. And General Motors wanted to do away with trolleys and interurbans so they could sell buses because they were the largest bus manufacturer in the United States.
Yeah. Right, but surely Vanderbilt and Stanford and their ilk didn't take kindly to this. And this would be like war. I mean, I speak from profound ignorance, but I find the topic really compelling.
Leland Stanford had his paws in a lot of things too. And the Vanderbilts did okay because they preferred freight anyway. The railroads always made more money on freight. In some ways, they were glad when the passengers started to disappear. They discontinued passenger lines going into New York City. Number of trains going into Grand Central and Penn Station decreased. that wasn't where the money was. It was,
yeah. If we fast forward from my presentation 40 to 50 years, we see Robert Moses, you know, and his great effort in remaking the city and making it the servant to the car. You know, the vast destruction that he wreaked on Brooklyn, his attempts to, you know, destroy Greenwich Village. It's you know, really extraordinary, the power that man wielded later on, you know, and it was financed by things like the Triborough Bridge tolls.
Yep.
He had an incredible financial chokehold on the politicians because he had the money, just like Lyndon Johnson later had an important chokehold on Texas politicians because he had money from the oil companies.
So, you know, Robert Moses is a beautiful example, Kyle. I mean, there wasn't a more powerful person in New York State than Moses. He could laugh at any politician. He could make Nelson Rockefeller weep. And if you want to read a fascinating book, The Power Broker by Robert Caro, and it is one of the truly great political science books. It's the biography of Robert Moses. It's about 500-600 pages, but it's unbelievable that a private citizen got that kind of power. He outdid J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, he had unbelievable power.
Yeah, so it does take power to reshape cities and the transportation networks that knit them together. You know, so we saw, you know, the fall of the Interborough Rapid Transit Company. You know, we saw the birth with the fall and the revival of New York City's ferry system in recent years. You know, and the subways declined, but they're coming back with new construction and a lot of renovation work to improve dilapidated stations. So there's a cycle to everything. But my presentation shows a key decade in the cycle of public transportation in New York City when the subways and the tunnel under the Hudson River, you know, came into play as part of the transportation network, and it really did make a difference to people's lives. And instead of a noisy and unpleasant ferry ride, you know, across the Hudson River, you could take the Hudson and Manhattan Railroad tubes and get from Hoboken to New York City in 10 minutes. So it really was a revolutionary decade that, well, really more 15 years, you know, from about 1900 to 1915, when the subways and, you know, the intercity trains, the great intercity train stations, Pennsylvania Station and Grand Central Station, become temples of commerce and public pride.
Could you tell a similar story later on? In other words, were postcards being produced documenting other changes in the city or elsewhere? Could somebody put together a story with postcards from the 40s, 50s, and 60s? Were they being produced?
And one of my earlier presentations for the Wichita Postcard Club talks about Art Deco buildings in New York City. You can look at the YouTube channel for the Wichita Postcard Club and see some of the changes in the city then.
No, I really like Ellen's question, and it was sort of bubbling around in my mind that in a way, and I don't think it's been adequately appreciated by people like Caro or something, that the almost inadvertent documentation of all of these epoch-making, you know, political and transportation systems and so on, all these were sort of inadvertently documented by the postcard, and, you know, obviously with many gaps, but at the same time, people with that imagination, I'm looking for postcards that document the railroad, the oil companies and their the outcome perhaps of their struggles, because their struggles have to be put out in words, but the outcomes of their struggles. And then everyday citizens buy these cards and send them, and they begin to imagine America in these terms, which are representations, and as Ellen put it, documentations of some of these epochs in our history. I had never really thought of postcards in those terms before, but does that make sense?
Is there a postcard of the making of the Cross Bronx Expressway? I mean, think what a big undertaking that was. Would it have been, or does anyone have such a card? I'm trying to understand how far along postcards have followed all of these trends.
I bet there is.
The postcards are really souvenirs. And if it would be up to the publisher. Like one time there was a postcard dealer who had a lot of postcards of Coney Island. I mean, he had a whole store of them, and he told me that Coney died, and so he was stuck with all these cards that had documented everything that had happened in Coney Island.
Yeah, we also see,
get on it.
Yeah, we also see a change in postcard production by the 50s, and it really wasn't used in the same way as a souvenir. And if it was a souvenir, it was one of the major buildings, or the Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, or whatever. And not everything was documented on these chrome cards, but more so those that were documented or ones that showed off the best of the city. And at the time, construction wasn't thought to be glamorous enough to be on postcards. So while there might be one, I haven't seen one. And it doesn't say anything to the souvenir collector to have produced it for them, because where would you have sold it, and how many people wanted to see this kind of work?
Well, Kyle showed us the building of the tunnel.
Pardon?
Kyle showed us cards of the building of the tunnels.
That was 20, 30 years before, and it was a whole different idea. It was something new and different. Just like when the telephone came in, it was documented. Now, find a telephone, it's harder to find once it's commonplace. But the tunnel was such a major event that it was documented. But later on, it just didn't come under the idea of souvenir or glamorous.
But there are plenty of, I have photo cards of, railroad workers and highway building.
Early
road,
cars.
Well, not sure, 1930 and so on, but I'm not going to try to get too picky here, but just maybe in different eras, different things happen. And that in itself is an interesting story. I mean, happened in postcard production. And that in itself is an interesting story, because if you look now at Instagram and such, the overwhelming amount of absolutely trivial kind of self-indulgent, photographs of meals and cats basically cover our I'm a little exaggerating here, cover our visual interests, but what eras did picture certain things, and when did those lose interest and become, and we recorded ourselves in different ways. I mean, this is an odd card. It's just sitting here, but that would be certainly not a souvenir, but it's a postcard, and it has to do with with things that we produce and admire and so on, and desire and so on. So there's a huge.
It's like
I'm just looking at stuff, and there's crazy, wonderful, idiosyncratic things.
Yeah, these advertising cards, again, were showing something new and different and exciting. And how do you put out your message? A postcard's a great way to do it. But it's an advertising card, and they're wonderful, wonderful advertising cards. But occupation cards, while they're around in the 10s, the 20s, the 30s, you don't see them as often later on.
I'd say you're right, yeah.
Yeah.
But whatever else is there is interesting on its own terms. And the fact that those occupation cards would have diminished and maybe disappeared, that in itself is a reflection of American values and interests that could be noted. And, you know, what we then chose to picture, you know, subsequently, it would be the whole issue of what we picture and how we imagine ourselves is a huge topic. And I think this kind of thing that Kyle brings up is just.
I would also stress not trying to be repetitive, but you know, we're in a period of the golden craze of postcards, and there's an enormous interest, and it's a competitive market, you know, so people try to produce cards of great quality, and you know, they really do succeed many times. There are cards advertising shipping lines in my presentation. There's cards advertising tunnels. There's a card advertising restaurants. You know, Detroit must have done at least 200 or 300 cards of New York City. You know, the same thing with the Rotograph Company. There's just an enormous number of high quality cards, and you know, it's not in some ways Manhattan Island is not a big place, so all those cards in a way can coalesce to, you know, provide us with if you imagine enough, an animated picture of the life in the city at that particular critical time of infrastructure building. You know, look how hard it is today to build new tunnels under the Hudson River between New York City and New Jersey, you know, but they were able to accomplish it then. There was the drive to build those tunnels and make the city go faster and faster.
There was also the thing, you know, in New York City that time, this was sort of the tail end, no pun intended, of all the horses being used for transportation, for pulling buses, pulling wagons. There was a lot of commerce that went on where horses were involved. And naturally, with horses, there's a byproduct, which made life very messy. And things like the subway, the elevated, you weren't on the street anymore. You could get off the elevated a block or two from where you wanted to go, and you didn't have to deal with the mess on the streets. And it was a messy place. New York City was a very messy place. And so these subways, the elevateds, were amazing. They were another way of avoiding getting your shoes dirty, so to speak.
I wanted to say just something briefly. It's not been too long ago, 15 or 20 years ago, that we had rack cards. And they are some of the finest advertising products, social history, events, and they're printed on great paper. You never see a damaged rack card. And, you know, there's no corner bins on a rack card. They are fabulous, and I think I think collectors will rediscover them when they start looking for. I have a small collection of cell phones on postcards. I have another collection of glasses on postcards, and you know, just goofy things like that. But think about a cell phone, how it used to always flip and all of this stuff. You know, it's just wonderful what are on rack cards. And they used to be at a show 50 cents a piece or 2 for a quarter or something. And I suggest we all look at them again sometime.
I'm unfamiliar with the term.
Yeah.
R-A-C-K?
Right. Yeah. Go ahead, Susan.
You pick them up off of a rack in a restaurant or at a university.
Oh, okay.
David, I'm not home right now, but you come to visit me in 2 weeks and I will show you 2,000 rack cards. But remember what Hal is saying, they were advertising cards. It told you what was the newest idea. how young people were dressing, how old people were sitting or whatever.
Tennis shoes.
Yeah, and with the shoe lady, we remember her. It just captures a different time, and it captures it differently. You don't see, yes, there are restaurants and you'll see the front and side of the restaurant, but it doesn't capture views the way it did in 1910. It's a whole different ballpark of imagery. David, I would love to show it to you, really, box after box.
Well, the cell phone cards, those have to be relatively, they're not very old. Were they advertising cards? Advertising
Yes, yes.
Never seen them.
Europe, oh my, Rochester, I'm sorry. They really came out in most of the bigger cities and at universities where they had young people. You'd find them downstairs in a New York restaurant near the bathroom. They weren't in full view, but you knew to go down and look for them. And Ralph Mascarella was the rack card king. He used to travel New York City and pick up cards, and he'd bring them to Wichita to show people. In the 1970s is pretty much when you begin to see them. And they were advertising cards done by advertising companies or by large companies. And I would say in the last 10 years, they stopped making them. The market had changed. They were making bigger cards. They were doing different types of advertising, but it was all about advertising. Rick, if you weren't a week before the Wichita show, I would be up in Rochester with 20 boxes of rack cards if you wanted. Okay.
The best thing about the rack cards is they were free.
Right.
Wait, as an educational moment, this would not be a rack card.
It could be, yeah.
Let's see the back. Let's see the back.
Clearly an advertising card.
Turn the back. Nope. Postcard.
Oh. My father.
It is a postcard. What do you mean?
Wait, the rack cards are postcards?
Rack cards are postcards, but rack cards have a different imagery. They have different information. If you're going to have a zip code on it, that's where it would be. All right, next time we meet, or you know what? If everyone could send a Michael or Rick their address, I will mail you a rack card. Is that okay?
How would you like to do a presentation?
Give me a program. Put your name and your address and just an idea of something. Now, if you tell me cement making, I'm not sure I could find it in 1970. But give me an idea whether you want glamour, whether you want, I don't know, politics or whatever.
Automobiles, the VWs.
Oh,
I got VWs.
Drinks,
up the kazoo. They did
Absolute.
series. They did series. The automotive company was excellent in doing it. Just card after card in a series. And it was
Absolute. Think of that. And Andrew Warhol. Oh my God.
Well, Susan, how would you like to do a presentation about rack cards?
Yeah. I told you everything I know.
Huh?
I told you everything I know about it.
Yeah, but we could see them.
Oh, I'd rather send you one.
Say something.
We'll think about it. Okay, Michael?
All right.
How about a PDF of 20 of them? And then you don't have to, just click it.
Oh, yes, I could do that, but I want to send it to you, okay?
I'd rather get one in the mail.
Okay. Michael, David's going to come to my house. Michael, you know what they are, don't you? Michael Langenstein?
Sure he does.
Rack cards are, yes.
Okay, so I don't have to send one to you, or I could.
You could send me a Halloween if you like.
There were some.
There were some. You bet.
I don't know if I can spare them, but what else can I tell you about them? They were unpredictable.
Are there people collecting them now?
I do, but
I still collect them.
Yeah, but most of the people who were serious about them are few and far between. That era has gone by. But I can't begin to tell you how stunning some of them are. I could go upstairs and show you some.
How can you tell the difference between a postcard and a rack card. When if you look at
They're
it,
made by
Well,
Max
okay.
Racks, or they had publishers that
There's
did it.
companies, yeah. But
Okay.
a rack card is a postcard, but they were put on racks, 2 words,
Right.
rack card. They were
Right.
put on racks in restaurants, in hotels. Hal, do you
Bars.
think?
Oh, not so much. I think
Mostly
restaurants were, and
restaurants.
bars.
Bars and restaurants. That they were looking for that young hip community to pick up on it. A lot of them are very naughty.
I was young and hip. I never
You
saw
still
one.
are, David. You still are.
When my wife
Which
and I,
one? Both?
I just wanted to say to Kyle that I don't think we've ever had a Zoom meeting where someone's talk stimulated as diverse a conversation as we have just had.
Well,
Everything
that's wonderful.
Everything from defecating horses to rack cards to
Well, yours
every
was
other
the
topic.
horse.
We've really touched everything practically.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah, I
serious about them. They're fabulous.
Oh,
I don't know if the people have dinner plans. I can go upstairs right now and bring down a box. But see,
Sure.
I have my national postcard mixed with my rack card. Should I do that?
Yes,
Sure.
please.
Do it.
And anybody who wants to email me your mailing address, I'll collect them all and email them to Susan.
Okay.
Send it to hello at Western New York, WNYpostcardclub.com. Hello at WNYpostcardclub.com. And I'll make sure Susan gets them all.
when my wife and I lived in Westchester for 10 years, my father would always insist that I go into New York and get him a bunch of those free postcards.
Great, great.
Do you have a bunch of them in your postcards now?
I have a number of boxes downstairs. My sister Gretchen got a bunch of them, and she tried to find some place that would take them, schools or whatnot. But I still have 1,000 or so downstairs.
Huh. Hey, Hal, would you like to do a presentation about rack cards coming up maybe in September or some future date?
Well, sometime, or, you know, other people, we didn't even have them here in Kansas. There were no rack cards. So we depended on Rack Ralph from Ralph Muscarella from New Jersey. It was a business for him. You know, he would drive in and you could take as many as you want because they were always replacing them. It must have been just fabulous. But in Washington, D.C., I saw them on walls. I should have taken, there are some racks cards about rack cards made by the companies showing their spinners or wall plaques where you would have these little pockets and put the postcards. And it was,
that was the way they were always sold. When did it become
they
called
sold.
rack
They were
card?
all free. They were all free. They were not
A lot of
sold.
postcards were sold on those kind of racks too, though. The spin
Yes,
ones.
that's true. That's true. At the souvenir stands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
We
the
have a
rack,
guy here
the
in
rack as
Rochester.
such was always around.
Right.
But then there's a transition when they became free.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a guy here in Rochester, a printing company that still makes postcards, you know, current day postcards of, like, you know, Niagara Falls, different places, and sells them. And he spoke to our club in person back, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. Remember, Rick?
Oh yes,
Edwards. I wonder if we could get him. It might be interesting to have him come do a Zoom meeting with us.
He
That'd
does
be
very
fun.
well.
It was the day before Election Day 2016.
Remember that, huh? That's pretty good.
That's right.
He sells them around to some restaurants and tourist places and on the Thruway, I think, and Wegmans might even sell them still. And they take the pictures, and I think he prints his own. He owns a printing company.
Show us what you have, Susan.
Oh gosh, I wanted to bring products.
It's come to this.
What?
Just kidding.
I wanted to bring the section of products, but I don't come across it as fast as I like to, because I know that Hal likes Coca-Cola, and we just talked about automobiles. products are my favorite topic, but as I pulled out several things here, I don't know who knows cartoons, but do you know this character?
Yeah.
Or this character? What audience were they going for?
Tattoos. Oh
Not
my
me.
God.
Going for young men.
And there's the
that's
back.
South
That's
Park.
Max
Here's-
Rack back.
This one is Max Rax. They're a big company that really did a good job. Oh, where's Rick Gary? A little Gumby card.
Yeah.
And so I have several. Oh, Garfield. Enough with my characters. Let me see what else I can pull out here. I do have them organized because that's my nature. And I'm pulling out music. This is Yoko Ono as an advertising card, I believe, for music. Again, a Max Rack card.
Could you slow down so I can see what?
Oh,
it says
Max in the blue oval.
Yeah, I see.
And this is okay. All right, and let's see who else is here. Ooh, hold that one over.
Hey, if you click, by the way, everybody, if you click on Susan's the 3 dots, you can click on pin her. It'll make her it'll take up the whole screen. You'll see them very clearly.
Oh,
you click on the 3 dots, and then click pin or whatever it says pin.
Oh, that's neat.
Isn't that neat?
Museum of Modern Art. Yeah.
Yeah.
Picasso to Pollock.
This is from Picasso to Pollock at the Guggenheim, and this is done by Go Card, another important manufacturer of rack cards. Again, you didn't buy them; you pulled them off the rack. Some people pulled off too many at one time. I guess here's. I mean, this could have been the 1950s, but it's not. Her hair is not 1950s. These are very time locked in. Who is, this is one from Europe. Do you recognize
Michelin guy.
The Michelin guy? He's playing for the Beaux-Arts in Brussels. And special card. Here's this one's not my favorites. So they're coming to my favorites. A lot of them are personal friends that did them. Well,
I have a whole collection of watches, not just swatches, but lots of watches had rack cards advertising. You know,
yes.
I haven't even thought about these topics for a long time. I haven't added to them.
That's, as I said, I think that the products, what I call products, is one of the richest. But I also add to it people who did individual cards, their own advertising cards. Here's Stanley Steamer Museum. But why is it a rack card? I don't know what more I can tell you. Oops, some of these are, here's, a friend of mine had she made her own jelly and she made her own postcard on one card. And then on another card, she shows herself holding up the jelly. Most of them, or many of them, came in series. One card is related to another. She just went crazy with her fruit. It was wonderful.
Yeah. Tina Turner did
yes.
a little group that were wonderful.
Yeah, if you want Tina Turner, just write her down and I'll find her for you. I think I have that. I may not have it here, but I do have that one. That's set.
Was she selling stockings or something? I don't know.
I don't know, but she's dancing wildly down the street.
Short dress.
Beautiful smile.
Oh, ooh. Yeah.
And here is,
let's show us.
Well, some of them, they're truly not rack cards so much as they're cards. I happen to be my favorites, which is friends of mine who did art displays or any program. They made a postcard and did or did not sign it. Oh, here's a favorite.
Yeah, yeah.
Here is our friend, oops, can I show you what it says?
Real Dolly.
Salvatore Dali eating a bowl of cereal. Okay. Yeah. Oh, here's a subway tile. This was, can you see this?
Yes.
That's a subway tile. This is a fellow who did a program for our textile group on, on fabric and weaving, but he also referred to New York City. He didn't like New York City, but he brought us only images of New York City. Oh, well. Oh, you can come look at them, but I'm trying to show you ones that are really rack cards and not my friends' cards. Here's one from Europe. A very simple ethnic design.
Show us the back. Yeah.
The back. Oopsie daisy. The back is another company. I have to look at it. Let me see if I can tell you what country. Is this Italian? I can't tell, but here's the back. Here's the back with their symbol. And the same company did, as I said, they like doing series. So they did this one with the other one. There may be more, but this is what I have. Hal, eyeglasses.
Yeah.
Oh, one of my favorites. Las Vegas Hotel. Where is she? Isn't she charming?
Oh, she's delightful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's Las Vegas in the background. I'm sorry for being so, I'm just whipping them by. I'm also running out of battery time, so here's...
We just lost your picture.
We lost your picture, yeah.
I think I'm I'm close to no... Some of these are just oversized postcards, so.
The Metro Postcard Club has something about rack cards on their website. But
yeah, the website is down.
Yes.
Yeah, it's been hacked and I'm not sure that it will be unhacked. Oh, years and years ago, the Russian tea room did two cards.
Right, beautiful.
This is one of them. Just amazing artwork. So it's contemporary art. Some of it is more abstract than you're used to. Some of it is just playful. I'm sorry I said I wouldn't care to do a program because I would have to be organized, and here I am just throwing images at you. But I don't often bring rack cards to shows because people have lost interest. I wish we can get people to respect modern cards a little bit more. Here's part of a series for the Beatles.
Did there used to be more interest in them?
Pardon?
Did there used to be more interest in them than there is today?
Yes, there was.
Yeah, right.
70s and 80s.
Huh.
Now, I think post-crossing, those in post-crossing may be more interested because it gives you a nice large background to write on. And contemporary, truthfully, some of the cards are valued for more than 25 cents or 50 cents. I've seen some from $6 to $10, and they're either extraordinary or they're Keith Haring or something else that would catch your eye and demand a little respect. The Absolute Vodka. Yeah, I'd have to
hundreds of those.
Yeah, and I have the book too. And every country, there are several different companies that did absolute cards. And mostly we know the absolute cards having an image, whether it be a group of people or whether it be birds or whatever, but all together they're in the shape of a vodka bottle. And I think there's a few hundred of them. Quite desirable, some more interesting than others.
We're touching on something that I've been wanting to share with you, and that is, you know, so I'm the pop-up lady. All of my cards are movable, and I'm doing an exhibition at the Grow Your Club starting December 1st. It will have the absolute, it will have the absolute vodka card in it. There's more than postcards. It's called animated advertising, premiums, promos, and pop-ups. There are many postcards, many of them from France at the late 19th century. But because it's advertising, they're all selling a product.
How would you like to do a presentation for us?
To come when that time is December 1st through February 11th. And I have the vodka. I have one from Israel that it's not the shape of a bottle. It's a tray where you can serve on it, but it's a postcard.
Ellen, do we know you from New York?
Hello.
Hi.
I only do movables.
Okay.
Would you like to do a presentation for our club in September?
Sorry?
Would you like to do a presentation for our club in September about those?
I would not, and I'll tell you why, because I'm preparing the exhibition. I'm working on the catalog. There'll be, you know, a 90-page color catalog and all of that. Afterwards, when it's up and running, I'd be happy to.
Oh, that'd be great.
My focus is getting this exhibition done and mounted. But you're talking about advertising postcards, and that will be in there.
Oh, that'd be great.
Can we, is it a lecture that you're providing to them as well?
I haven't planned the program that will go with it, but I usually do give a lecture. I had another exhibition in 2014 on Wojciech Kubaszta, who did many postcards, movable and not. And so I had a panel discussion then.
Do you have a sample of this novelty card near you?
No, actually, right now I'm not where all the exhibition items are. Otherwise, I'd be happy to just grab it and show it to you as you did.
Ellen, where are you located?
New York City.
Oh, okay.
Right now, I'm not in New York City. Otherwise, I would have my material with me.
Do you have a website or Facebook or anything that show what you're doing?
So I'm on the board of the Movable Book Society, and so I post things there. I have my own site, and
can you put in your chat? Can you put in the chat your website? And
what's your website? Yeah, or just tell us even.
Well, my website is popuplady.com.
Okay.
And you can write to me there. I can see what I'm doing.
What is it again?
Popuplady.com.
Well, would this one be considered a rack card? It's actually from last year for an exhibit at the University of Rochester.
Let's turn it around.
It does not have an indicia on it, but it has a description of the show and when it was last year.
The same concept in that it's an advertising card. It comes later than the majority of them. Where did you pick it up?
At the University of Rochester.
Right. Universities were real smart to catch on to this.
Yeah, well, this is from last year. The show was last year from March to December.
It's an advertising card. And if you'd like to call it a rack card, I won't disagree.
Yeah, okay, whatever.
Hal, you want to, Hal, did you leave us? It's not technical. It's not during that period, but it's the same.
Oh, definitely not.
Same concept.
Yeah.
The museums, even our shows, the postcard shows, we put out cards and we don't charge to announce our shows, but they're not technically rack cards.
Yeah, this is like 4x6, just exactly like a postcard size now.
Yeah,
so
that's another thing. The rack cards were 4x6.
They're just on a table. Help yourself.
Looks like a Benetton ad.
Tower Records did hundreds of different ones.
I'm going to give out postcards at the exhibit. I think I'm going to prepare postcards of the exhibit, whether it's the catalog cover.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
People at the last exhibit were begging to go home with something, and the Gloria Club didn't do it. But if they don't want to do it, I will do it.
Yeah. And you've not been to a Metropolitan Postcard Club meeting?
I have. I'm a member too.
Okay.
I haven't been to a meeting. No, I've gone to some of the shows. Some of the recent ones, I've just not been in town and couldn't attend it. So
Steve Zolf is in the audience. He doesn't have a microphone, but he's the new president of the Metropolitan Postcard Club. Michael Langenstein is here. He's an honored member, as is Miriam Berman. And I'm looking, well, Kyle, you're kind of an honorary member. You've come to enough meetings. Damaris has been at a Metropolitan meeting.
I was a member of one or two years some time ago.
Yeah, but you hadn't been traveling in for a while, so it didn't happen.
It just happens the Metropolitan is in the city, so I'm living there now.
Well, I'd love to see you there. We're in a new location on 14th Street.
Yes, my kids went to camp there, and they went to preschool there. So.
Oh, it's still there.
Downtown, yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's fabulous.
Well,
I do encourage everyone to collect New York City postcards because there's such a fascinating diversity to them.
There are two movable ones in the exhibition. One of the Flatiron Building and another of the, I guess it's Statue of Liberty. That's movable. She's selling pencils.
Yeah, I just came across a card that I have for quite some time. It's of the Queensboro Bridge, and it's a movable card, but it was sold and advertised as a hold to light card, Damaris. There are little holes where all the stanchions are attached. There's a little hole there, so you get like a nighttime view of where the bridge is based upon these little holes showing light when you put light behind it. So I should save it for you, Damaris.
Oh, Kyle, have you seen a lot of
Yes, Susan, you should.
The building of the George Washington Bridge?
I have some of those, but it's George Washington Bridge is from the
it's later
1930s onward. So
yeah,
there's really not that many cards of the Washington Bridge.
Okay. Well, there's also
say the Brooklyn Bridge or the Manhattan or the Williamsburg Bridge.
What's interesting about the George Washington Bridge, well, two things. There's a Washington Bridge and then there's the George Washington Bridge. But when the George Washington Bridge was proposed, there's a card showing it, but it's not what the bridge ended up looking like. Totally different.
It wasn't cladded like it was supposed to be.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It was cladded, as you mentioned. It's supposed to have been cladded, but it became too expensive. But it has almost a different angle to it. But most people looking at it wonder, you know, what is this? This is not anything that I recognize in New York City, but it was a proposed plan that never worked out.
Kyle, I wanted to thank you. Those postcards you showed tonight were really
you're most welcome. Yeah, there's
really amazing.
It's an amazing time in the city's history.
Yeah, thank you very much.
The narrative of it made it very much more interesting than showing it to us, creating this tour that you did. I thought that was very unique.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Well, I guess that concludes our meeting.